I was once like you, but now I am something else. My past is a blur, forgotten in the shadows. Yet, every night, I remember. New tales, twisted and dark, waiting to be told. Brace yourself, for the story you're about to hear might just be the last one you'll ever hear.
The story that I am going to tell is about a Christmas night, about a happy, warm Christmas night. The snow gently blanketed the small town of Maplewood, casting a serene hush over the landscape as the hours counted down to New Year's Eve. John and Sarah, a young married couple, had decided to spend this year's celebration in peaceful solitude, away from the chaos of parties and festivities. After years of noisy gatherings with family and friends, they craved simplicity, just the two of them in their cozy, secluded cabin. In the kitchen, Sarah hummed a soft Christmas tune while she arranged a tray of freshly baked cookies. Her dark hair was loosely tied back, and a playful smile tugged at her lips. She glanced over at John, who was struggling to light a fire in the stone hearth. "You know, it might help if you didn't smother the flames," she teased. John chuckled, brushing ash off his hands. "I'll have you know I'm a fire-building expert. I'm just giving it time to grow," he replied, his deep voice warm with humor. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a laid-back charm that had won Sarah over years ago. Even though he was easygoing, his protectiveness over Sarah was something she knew she could always count on. The cabin was the perfect picture of comfort, with flickering candles casting soft light and garlands of greenery draped over the staircase railing. Outside, the snowstorm that had started earlier in the evening now raged through the trees, wind rattling against the windows. "Should we toast to the new year a little early?" John asked, holding up a bottle of red wine, his eyes bright with a spark of mischief. Sarah grinned. "Absolutely. To us. And a peaceful night." Their glasses clinked, and their laughter mixed with the comforting crackle of the fire. But as the hours passed, a faint unease began to creep into the edges of their perfect evening. It started with a sound, distant but distinct. A crunching noise, like heavy footsteps crunching through the snow, coming closer to the cabin. Sarah paused mid-sentence, setting down her glass. "Did you hear that?" John frowned, stood up, and walked over to the frosted window. At first, all he could see was the swirling snow, but then he spotted something, movement just at the edge of the woods, barely visible beneath the dim porch light. "Probably just someone lost in the storm," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Sarah joined him at the window, her breath fogging up the glass as she peered out. The figure stood motionless, the outline of a red suit and white trim unmistakable. "Is that Santa?" she whispered, half laughing to cover up the unease that was settling in her chest. The figure began to move, trudging slowly toward the cabin. John's protective instincts kicked in. "Stay here," he said firmly, grabbing his coat. "Wait, don't go out there." Sarah grabbed his arm, her voice trembling, but John was already at the door, pulling it open just enough to step out onto the porch. The icy wind bit at his face as he called out, "Hey, do you need help?" The figure stopped a few feet away, still partially obscured by the swirling snow. It was a man in a Santa costume, but the red suit was filthy, and the white trim was stained with something dark. A cracked mask covered his face, hollow eyes locked on John. "Are you okay?" John asked again, his voice more uncertain now. The figure tilted its head as if studying him before stepping forward without a word. A shiver ran down John's spine as he quickly slammed the door shut, locking it. He turned to Sarah, his breath shallow with anxiety. "Call the police." "What? What's going on?" "Just do it," he urged, his voice tight with urgency. Sarah grabbed her phone, but when she tried to turn it on, the screen stayed dark. "No signal," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. A heavy knock on the door made them both jump. "Ho, ho, ho," a deep, distorted voice called from the other side. The voice was wrong, distorted, almost inhuman, as if layered with static. Then the knocking turned into pounding. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her hands trembling. But before they could make a plan, the sound stopped. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the howling wind outside. "Maybe he's gone," John said, though his gut told him otherwise. Then a sharp, splintering noise came from the back of the cabin. They froze. "He's inside," Sarah whispered, clutching John's arm, her voice barely audible. John grabbed the fire poker from the hearth, his knuckles white around the handle. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low, as he moved cautiously toward the source of the noise. The cabin, once warm and inviting, now felt like a dark maze of shadows. Every creak of the floorboards sent jolts of fear through them. They reached the kitchen only to find the back door wide open, snow blowing in from the outside. Then they heard it, footsteps above them. "He's upstairs," John muttered. "No," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "We need to leave, now." Before they could move, the footsteps turned into heavy, deliberate stomps as they descended the stairs. The shadow of the Santa figure loomed large at the bottom, his form growing as he reached the last step. John lunged forward, swinging the fire poker with all his strength, but the Santa figure moved with terrifying speed, sidestepping the blow and knocking John to the ground. "Run!" John shouted to Sarah, his voice filled with desperation. Sarah bolted for the front door, but in an instant, the Santa was upon her. He grabbed her arm with unnatural strength, yanking her back toward him. She screamed, kicking and struggling, but the man in the Santa suit was far too strong. John scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. With a roar, he charged at the Santa, tackling him to the ground. The Santa let out a guttural growl, tossing John aside like a rag doll. Sarah's screams echoed through the cabin as the Santa plunged a knife into her chest. Her eyes met John's one final time before her body went limp. "No!" John screamed, tears streaming down his face. He grabbed the fire poker once more, swinging it with all his might. It struck the Santa square in the mask, and the figure staggered back, the mask cracking further. John pinned him down, ready to deliver the final blow. But as he raised the poker, the Santa's face tilted toward him, revealing empty black voids where eyes should have been. The room began to spin, and John felt an unbearable pressure in his chest. Everything went black. John woke with a jolt, gasping for air. Morning light filtered through the window, and his head throbbed as he looked around the familiar room. "It was a dream," he whispered, relief flooding over him. He reached out for Sarah, but the bed beside him was cold, empty. "Sarah," he called, panic rising in his throat. He jumped out of bed and began searching the cabin. Everything was just as they'd left it, the cookies, the wine glasses, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. Then he saw it, the cracked Santa mask lying on the floor.